Welcome to the Jackson Square Ventures Book Club. To get started, I want to thank Merrill for being our co-sponsor, so thank you, Merrill. As many of you know, the motto of JSV Book Club is Ancora Imparo, which is a Latin phrase meaning I am still learning. For us, it serves as a reminder that no matter the extent of our experiences, professional and otherwise, there's always more to learn from those around us. The books we select are by authors who offer firsthand, authentic, and insightful lessons across a variety of topics. We've had the privilege of hosting a wide variety and diverse group of people, from NFL legend Joe Montana, Bonobos founder Andy Dunn, organizational theorist Jeffrey Moore, historian Margaret O'Mara, Pulitzer Prize winner Taylor Branch, among many others. And if you were just added to our list for our event tonight, I think you'll probably be added to our list in the future, and we really hope to see you another time. So tonight's a really special night for me because our guest of honor is entrepreneur, angel investor, author, and policy advisor Tom Kemp. Tom's a member of the JSV family. He founded and was CEO of our portfolio company, Centrify, which became a leading cybersecurity cloud provider. Centrify had a great exit, which is very helpful for a venture capital firm. And I developed a really close relationship with Tom and really respect him as a founder and a CEO that took the company all the way. Having said that, Tom's since become a technology policy advisor, an angel investor, and he led the campaign marketing efforts in 2020 to pass Proposition 24, which we'll probably hear about a little more today, the California Privacy Rights Act. He also proposed and helped shape more recently the California Delete Act, Senate Bill 362, and that was just signed into law last month, and I think it'll be in effect in the beginning of the year after next. So as our author, Tom's here to discuss his critically acclaimed book, and quite a title, Containing Big Tech, How to Protect Our Civil Rights, Economy, and Democracy. So as if that's not enough, joining Tom is Alistair McTaggart. And Alistair founded, out of the blue, as a real estate developer in San Francisco, and he'll tell the story, I think, the Californians for Consumer Privacy, nationally recognized consumer privacy advocacy group. And after that, he was appointed to the board of the California Privacy Protection Agency. He is here in his individual capacity and not speaking on behalf of the board or the agency. He's responsible for creating the two strongest consumer privacy laws in the United States. From 2016 to 18, he led the effort that resulted in the passage of the California Consumer Privacy Act. And then from 19 to 20, he authored and sponsored the California Privacy Rights Act, which was successfully passed through Proposition 24 and gave Californians among the most comprehensive policy rights in the world. Also here today, and we go back something like 25 plus years when we originally met, is Roger McNamee. Roger's a noted businessman, investor, venture capitalist, musician, and author. His book, Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe, confronts Facebook's privacy issues and its role in shaping modern American politics and culture. A Silicon Valley investor and legend for over 35 years, he co-founded Elevation Partners and Silver Lake Partners. We're pleased that tonight's conversation will be moderated by Professor Lydia De La Torre, an attorney that teaches privacy, data protection, and AI at UC Davis Law. She's also the founding partner of Golden Data Law. GDL is a teaching law firm incorporated as a public benefit corporation that serves the needs of the nonprofit sector and has its mission mentoring a diverse and inclusive group of law students and recent grads so they can grow into solid, ethical law professionals. Lydia served on the advisory board of the Californians for Consumer Privacy during the Prop 24 campaign, and then was appointed to the California Privacy Protection Agency board. Like Alistair, Lydia is here in an individual capacity and not speaking on behalf of the CPPA or board or agency tonight. So what are we here for? Tonight you'll hear how Tom's thesis in his book applies to the current stage of the venture tech ecosystem, what regulators are done and are considering with regard to tech policy in the areas of privacy, AI, and competition in key digital markets, and how the California effect is setting the standard for the rest of the US. With that, I'll hand things over to Lydia to get the discussion started, but I want to thank everybody for being here.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Pete. I want to jump into the action here right away and start with the questions for this amazing panel. The first round of questions is about their inspiration. How did they come to be people involved in privacy policy of all things, or tech policy? And we're going to start with Tom. What was the epiphany that led you to write the book Containing Big Tech? And special request, can you talk about the illustration and the octopus, and what's the meaning of that? Because I think it's a very visual representation of the content of the book.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. Thanks to Pete and JSV. Pete, thanks for being a great friend. And thank you, Lydia, Alistair, and Roger for being on this panel, and I really appreciate people being here. So the epiphany that led to this book was with my co-founder, Adam, at Centrify, that we were a cybersecurity company, and we would get called in after some very large breaches of some of the largest companies and government agencies in the world. And I knew things were bad, and I knew that data was being stolen, but it was pretty amazing to see the size and scope of the data, the amount of data being hacked, and the nature of the data itself. I mean, we're talking hundreds, millions, billions of records about individuals with thousands of individual data points associated with each and every one of us, and it was being stolen by who knows. And it really got me to thinking about, we need a better way of protecting this type of data, but should this data really be collected by governments and businesses? Should we not have some rights over that data? And what could happen, and what's the impact on society if that data starts being used against us and weaponized in various ways? And so it led to kind of 3 initiatives after Centrify was acquired that I set out doing. The first of which is that based on those problems and issues, I wanted to do policy. And so I was very fortunate to hook up with Alistair, who was working on this ballot proposition. And I got to work with him. And Alistair is truly, probably in the privacy world, ranks up there with Louis Brandeis in terms of US privacy, in terms of the impact on, no, I'm serious. He's the guy that got not 1, but 2 comprehensive privacy bills, and everyone else in various states is following, and he's incredibly influential. And he's also inspired me to do policy advising, and so I worked on a bill in Texas, and I worked on this California Delete Act that we'll probably talk about later. The second thing is that it also inspired me to, look, you can do so much with policy, but maybe via the capitalist system that maybe you can put some money to use and invest in some great companies. And so there's some of my angel investment privacy code, Michelle. I've got the SecuV folks, Mike and Prashant, and I'm sorry if I'm missing someone else as well. So it also led me to invest in companies that are doing cybersecurity and privacy to help businesses, help consumers to get their arms around this. And then lastly, I felt that there was a need for education, and my knowledge of doing cybersecurity, working with Alistair on privacy, et cetera. And so I wanted to write a book to give my perspective. One of my inspirations was, and that's the first time I met Roger, but his great book, Zucked. And so he he really kicked things off with Professor Shoshana Zuboff, and there were great inspirations. And so I wanted to give my viewpoint coming from cybersecurity, the recent work, all the tech companies that I invest in heavily do AI. So I really wanted to look deeply at how the large tech players were doing AI, the potential impact. So that was the proverbial epiphany came from just seeing what was happening vis-a-vis breaches, and it led to those things.
And the octopus?
Oh, the octopus, yes. So, okay, we're in California here, and so we may recall the robber barons, right? And so the octopus right here. So the robber barons were portrayed as octopuses, a big octopus with Leland Stanford, and then there was a famous drawing that was really the first representation of a monopoly. And there was a really interesting event that happened, that there was these land farmers, that they had a land dispute with the Southern Pacific Railway, and then federal marshals came in and they got massacred. And that led to this writing of the book called The Octopus by Frank Norris in 1900. And so that follows just like these large monopolies and the impact on individuals to the point where people actually got killed. And so the Big Four was represented as octopus. There was another image of Standard Oil with its tentacles wrapping around state houses, people, other industries, et cetera. And so what this represents right here is a modern version of the octopus in the cloud right here. And their tentacles are apps. And each of these little icons on the app represents one of the chapters. So data breaches, AI, et cetera. So that's the background right there. And it was interesting, the original picture said the curse of California, if you look at the fine print. And I was actually thinking of putting the curse of Silicon Valley, but I think that was just too deep for people right there. So I just left it with this. So.
Thank you so much for that explanation. I have a question for Roger in that vein of inspiration and journey. As Tom mentioned, you wrote the book, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe. And this was one of the first books that shined the light on the damage that companies like Meta can potentially cause to society. For those who have not read the book yet, what led you to write the book? And looking back, what do you think the impact of the book has been in the 4 or 5 years that have passed since you wrote it?
So I came to Silicon Valley in 1982. So when I arrived, the biggest thing going on in the Valley was the space shuttle. So I've had the great pleasure of being part of this community from before it was Silicon Valley, really. And after the financial crisis, I noticed a massive cultural shift taking place. And the first 50 years of Silicon Valley, from 1956, the AT&T consent decree, until roughly 2008, was spent with the notion that you could use technology to empower people, and you could use it to make them more productive. And I followed Steve Jobs' call to come out to Silicon Valley, and I was lucky enough to get here when there wasn't, tech was not an industry, it was not an investment category, and so I was lucky to be there while all of it was going on. It was pure dumb luck. But in 2008, especially 2009, I started to notice the cultural shift towards essentially Silicon Valley took 0% interest rates and became private equity firms. So every company was essentially using free capital and data to extract value either from existing industries or from people. And it was completely predatory, it was zero sum. And you can count on your hands the number of companies founded since 2009 that didn't follow that model. That was where the money was, that was the big opportunity. And by 2011, I realized that I could no longer manage people's money because I would have to either embrace that value system or get out of the business. So I told my partners, that when Elevation was done in 2016, I was going to be retiring. And what was incredible was that immediately after, in January of 2016, I saw people using Facebook to spread malicious hate speech against Hillary Clinton. And I saw that they were using Facebook ads to spread the stuff. And then when Brexit happened, I realized that you could undermine an election. And I went to Zuck and Cheryl, who had both been proteges of mine, and mentored them both, in October of 2016 with the argument that there was something about the business model, the algorithms, and the culture of Facebook that was allowing bad people to undermine democracy and civil rights. And I gave them a long list of examples. I did this privately, hoping that I could persuade them to act. And of course, less than 2 weeks later, the election happens. What was a possible outcome? From Facebook's point of view, being that it was clearly being used by Russia in a way that was illegal to interfere with the election. And I said to them they need to throw themselves on the mercy of the government to do what Johnson & Johnson did after the Tylenol poisoning, and go in and fix this. And I spent 4 months pleading with them to do the right thing. It became clear to me that they weren't going to do it. And at that point, I realized that I was in this really weird position, that I understood the inside of the company. I was a white man in my early 60s, late 50s, in a position to go to Washington and make the case for regulating technology. And so I started doing that. And the writing of the book was just because I needed to raise the platform, I needed to get it broader, I needed a better excuse for public speaking. And the book did that really effectively. The reality was I think it raised awareness a ton. But when I do speaking today, the same thing will happen. I will leave here and somebody will ask me the question, should I delete my Facebook account? That's the same question everybody asked me in 2017. They will then say, what are you going to do next? Like, I'm the one whose job it is to fix this. And my simple point is, a year from now, we're going to have a general election that is going to be undermined in every possible way. And it's going to do it with the absolute willing support of journalists and politicians. And we have a choice. Those of us who invest in Silicon Valley have a choice. This is only possible because we allow it. Interest rates are now 5%. The most dangerous business models in Silicon Valley that were at the incubator stage have been wiped out, crypto and metaverse. But Microsoft very cynically played a game with OpenAI, which I believe was on the verge of bankruptcy when they put that money in. And they decided to do a giant con, and it's worked. Most successful hype campaign I've ever witnessed, particularly for a product that doesn't actually deliver economic value. And I don't know what we're going to do. I hope we get this right. But it's going to take collective action. And it's been 40 years since America's engaged in collective action. I don't know if we're up to it. And I shudder to think what will happen if we're not. But I want to be optimistic, so I'm hopeful the people in this room will collectively insist that our elected officials and journalists do a way better job.
Thank you so much for that candid and powerful answer. I have a similar question for Alastair, but before I ask the question, I'm going to have to object to the idea. We know each other for a while. Alastair knows that I appreciate him very much, but as an academic, comparing him to Brad, this is a little bit too far for me.
As it relates to privacy.
But in fairness, I think we can collectively agree that since Brandeis, he stands alone.
Okay, we can find some compromise and get to a better language. Yes. Okay, so here's the question, Alastair. You were behind Californians for Consumer Privacy, which is the organization that gave the United States, and California in particular, the first comprehensive privacy law in 2018. This is the California Consumers Privacy Act. You have shared the story with me of a dinner that happened at your house. I think it has also been published in some newspapers, where you had a conversation with a Google executive that was, I believe, dating a friend of your wife. And that was, there was some information shared there that might have been part of the beginning of your journey. But if you can talk to us about that moment that caused the epiphany and how you walked into where you are today, step by step, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the micro answer and the macro. At the micro level, actually started with a friend of mine right there, Rick Arney, who is the vice chair of Californians for Consumer Privacy, and he's a friend of mine, and we had kids in the same preschool, and he would come over at night and we'd have a drink or take a walk, and he was the first person. I lived here for 20 years. I still didn't understand the critical difference about initiatives, which for those of you who don't know, they supersede regular law in California, so the legislature can't undo them. And I had lived here all that time and hadn't really realized that they were better law or stronger law. So he's kind of an initiative junkie and was telling me about that. So that's one. Then we have this dinner where I met some guy from Google. And the only thing that kind of tweaked me is I was trying to make conversation. Frankly, I didn't think I was ever going to see him again. But I was trying to be nice, and I asked him, should I be worried about what Google knows about me? And I expected, no, the plane's not going to crash. You've gotten to the airport. The most dangerous part's over. And instead he said, no, actually, yeah, you should be really worried about it. That's odd. No, we're going to crash, right? And so I guess the third piece is, my dad always said, leave the world a better place. And I really had a lot of respect for my dad. And he had different careers. He was a business guy, and then he kind of got into nonprofit, which I thought brought him more pleasure just watching him, or more satisfaction than just the business side of things. And then the fourth, honestly, was a shower. One day I'm like, I wonder if this problem would be susceptible to an initiative, because we've all lived in this country for a long time. If there's enough money, change does not happen, right? If there's enough, we've all seen it in all the big industries. It's really hard to change. But California has this crazy system where if you can get something on the ballot and it's appealing enough to people, 1 in 8 Americans gets pointed in a different direction. And then oftentimes, as we've seen, and we've all witnessed it, from clean air to lead paint, pick an industry, cigarettes, we've led the way, property taxes. And sometimes you like them, sometimes you don't, but we have this crazy outsized influence because of the setup. And that's why always after the presidential election, the next most expensive series of elections is the California propositions, because they're so powerful. So I thought, okay, maybe there's a way. And I really expected there to be 15 reasons why no one had done this before and why it wouldn't work. So Rick and I started working on this together, and it, we kept on pushing on doors, expecting them to be locked, and some took a little more effort to open, but one thing led to another. So that's kind of the micro of like how did we kind of start down that road. The macro, I suppose, is as you got into it, people like Roger had done deeper thinking before I got into it, and you started to realize that I've always said that privacy is the wrong word for privacy. Because people think of it as, I don't care about the shopping cart. I don't really care if they knew I looked at, a sweater or whatever. But it's not that. What you really come down to, and this is why we have the Fourth Amendment and why, Madison was so far-sighted to think about what would happen in a world where the citizen didn't really have any power in relation to the government. If the government could just walk into their house and take their papers and take a look at what they were doing, you could never organize against the government, right? No one would have any power. So we have the Fourth Amendment, which served us well until this technology came along, which we're all carrying in our pockets, right? And voluntarily, we all give information, reams of it, every day to these corporations, which end up knowing much, 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 much more about us than the NKVD or the SS or any of the sort of most police states. These companies know everything about us, and then you say, well, that's innocuous, who cares? And the reality is, as we all saw in 2017, 2018, 2019, the things we thought were laws constraining the action of a president turned out not to be, right? They turned out to be mores that normal people kind of adhered to, but actually there's a lot of leeway there. And I've always said the same thing, which is that, Larry and Sergey and Mark, Roger knows them, I don't know them. These guys, their big decision in the world is, do I take the red 757 or the blue 757 to Davos, right? And I'm a prince, and I'm not going to upset the apple cart, right? I'm going to, within reason, stay on the good side. But if you put someone like our former president in charge of one of these companies and said to them, you're worth $25 million now. Would you like to be a billionaire? Well, how do I get there? Well, I'm going to really monetize the crap out of this business. How do I do that? Oh, I know everything about everybody. So I can actually make to you the argument that you, as that person, have the fiduciary responsibility to elect the government that will best regulate you. And by the way, guess what? It's legal. If I'm a company and I use my information that's about everybody in this room, and I know who the homophobes and the racists and the whatever are, and I can influence a certain number of people, it's not very many, in an electoral cycle, and I don't coordinate with the campaign, that is 100% my First Amendment rights under the laws of the land today. And so what you're really looking at is a world, and by the way, this is within the United States. They can also do it in Myanmar, they can do it in Thailand, they can do it anywhere they want. The power that is held in the hands of a half dozen, 15, 20 people in this country now, there's never been power held by private citizens like that, I don't think, since the founding of the Republic. And I'm a capitalist. I went to business school. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist. But I also think that we need some regulations. And
Can I add something to what he just said? So what he's describing is surveillance capitalism as it's employed in advertising. The problem is metastasized dramatically. And I'll use the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th as an example. So they were, if you pull out the poor boys and the Oath Keepers, those were, for the most part, small business owners and their spouses who did that attack. They were, average age was late 40s, early 50s. I would be willing to bet that if you asked every one of those people 2 years previous to that, could you ever imagine yourself attacking the seat of government or attacking a police officer? None of them would have said yes. They were, without exception, manipulated in Facebook groups to believe that attacking police officers and attacking the Capitol was their patriotic duty. Now, how did that happen? Every time they touch a digital system, a fingerprint gets left behind. So think about this. It's not just all your financial activities. It's their real-time location all the time. It's all of your medical tests. It's all of your prescriptions. It is everything you do on the web. It's everything you do in applications. It's any time you go anywhere and leave a mark. All of that trades freely. With that, they can build a data voodoo doll of you. And they can use it to, because they control the menus online, they can control the choices available to you, and they can nudge you in desired directions. The reason why there is so much hate speech, disinformation, conspiracy theories online is because people are most valuable when they are either outraged or afraid. Because in those things they seek comfort. And the critical thing is hate speech, disinformation, and conspiracy theories are not a byproduct of social media. They are the product. Which is why when you see something called trust and safety, the key thing to understand is it's not real. Trust and safety is literally a Potemkin thing to create the illusion of addressing a problem that is systemic. And now, so the metaverse was trying to convert this into a world where they literally could check your eye movement and your heart rate in real time and manipulate you in real time. Fortunately, interest rates went to 3%, temporarily blew that up. But generative AI is just a different package of the same stuff, okay? It is all, again, you're talking about a product that is designed to be plausible, not factual. Plausibility has very little value in our economy. And just the thing I would point out to you here is the problem is metastasizing every day. We have the power to stop it like this. We're just not doing it.
Thank you so much. I want to go back for a second to Alastair to ask him one question that relates to the campaign, actually. How did you meet Tom? That's the question.
Well, I'll start with how I met Lydia, because Lydia was one of the nice people. So when Rick and I first got going, no one would talk to us. But like, who are these two idiots? And tech hated us, and you're going to come regulate us, screw off. And most of the nonprofits also were like, what are you doing in our space? You haven't paid your dues. You haven't been here for 30 years. And the academics also were like, you guys you don't know what GDPR is, But Lydia was kind and gracious and took the time to actually read stuff and give us feedback and kind of, help put us on the straight and narrow. So I wanted to say thank you for that. Instrumental in giving us the feedback to get the first law passed in 2018. And then when I did the initiative in 2020, I'm totally inexperienced trying to run a campaign, and terrified at how much money everything's costing. And so I tried to start raising some money, and we got a website together, and people would give us $20 or $30, and someone gave us $500. And I generally tried to write everybody back, but certainly a guy who give me $500, I'm going to write him back. And I think it was 500. Anyway, so I wrote you back, and I said thank you so much for the gift. And a day goes by, and then I get this email back saying, why are you writing me a thank you letter? And I was like, well, because you gave me $500. He's like, you should be doing other things. This is a bad use of your time. But if you're interested, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. So then I get the 20-page PowerPoint about all the things we're doing wrong. And I literally call the guy, and I'm like, hey, would you like to take over my marketing for the campaign? And seriously, that was how it was done. About 3 days later, he was running the marketing for the campaign. I didn't meet him. I didn't meet him for like a year and a half, like physically. And I just knew intuitively that his heart was in the right place. He would take on these people, these kind of trolls in Twitter. And I remember one of my favorite ones was like, oh, so you're back again. And then he went on to like a very long, detailed analysis of why our law was better. I'm like, how does this guy, someone actually read the law, and it's 56 pages of fine print. And so that was my introduction to Tom Kemp. And and look at him now. He literally, he's underselling. He got the Delete Act it passed. Senator Becker was the headline, but Tom got it passed. It was his really stalwart efforts over a couple of cycles to get this thing through and done. And it's extraordinary. So this Delete Act for the data brokers, allowing you to delete your information from the data brokers, is another thing of.
Show of hands, how many people have attempted to delete their data under CPRA? Okay, now how many of you have been successful? Right, how many have done more than 3? Right? Okay, so this person's incredibly persistent. The law is as currently read, notwithstanding the brilliance of CPRA. These guys use every excuse under the sun not to do it. The Delete Act will make it harder for them to do it. Now they're going to argue about whether they're data brokers or not, right? And that'll be litigated for years. But please try to delete your stuff, okay? Seriously. It's permission slip from Consumer Reports is the way you do it.
And I'm going to say that probably people who are laughing are the ones that know Tom. Because that's so true.
Is this a roast now?
No. It's actually an appreciation, deep appreciation. We're going to talk a little bit about legislation, right? Like the policy translated into legislation. And my first question on this is for Alastair. After the CCPA was enacted, and you talked about it a little bit already, Californians for Consumer Privacy moved forward a ballot initiative. This is Proposition 24, which was enacted in 2020. The California Privacy Rights Act. What led you to go to the voters? The law had already been enacted. What led you to take that additional step to go to the voters to enact CPRA?
Super simple. In 2018, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I'm like, oh, we got CCPA passed. This is great. First omnibus, consumer privacy law in the country. By far the strongest. And in January 2019, I realized, oh, this is why, because industry showed up, and the insurance guys had an amendment that would just, remove everything to do with insurance, and the car guys had something that would remove all the data associated necessary to do a recall and monitor the safety of the car, which is like everything. It went on and on, and I spent all of 2019 fighting, and I had some friends in the legislature, so we managed to stop bad amendments. But I realized if we didn't go back to the voters and enact something that was going to pass the test of time, we would privacy wouldn't be recognizable in 2 or 3 years. And so by going back, we have this neat formula in Prop 24 or CPRA, which says that any amendment which furthers the cause of privacy, and we have a whole list of what that looks, sort of almost like a constitution, is fine. But anything that hurts privacy cannot be passed. And literally, we went from, 30 amendments in 2019 to 0. Like now industry realizes they can't pass something in the legislature that will weaken privacy. So it's really, as long as the feds don't screw it up, and by the way, there are industries in Washington trying to get them to screw it up and trying to have a law that would preempt California. But if that doesn't work, as long as that doesn't work, our law in California will stay as this sort of beachhead of privacy. And look, it's not perfect yet, and it is hard to delete and everything, but look, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so even our regulations and this is public knowledge, so we're not having a mini board meeting here, but our regulations from the agency haven't yet been fully enacted. They're not fully, it'll take a while. But I always say, go back to income tax. It was small at the beginning, and now you look at the tax code, it's tens and tens of thousands of pages, and so eventually ours will be effective. And I don't want to, so I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. And we're going to have a question for Tom now, and it relates to the law that we just applauded a moment ago. Mm-hmm. You were the architect behind the new privacy bill that we just passed called the California the Lead Act. You proposed it to State Senator Becker, helped draft it, and we're really a big advocate behind it. I want to add here just a personal note on Tom, that he was fighting for this law to the last minute. We thought that it was not going to come out of the Committee on Appropriations, and he, on the way to Sacramento to fight for the bill, was gracious enough to stop at Davis and talk to my students. So it was really exciting for them to have this person, come and talk about the law, go and talk to the people in Sacramento, and then 2-3 weeks later, we heard that it was going to move forward. So thank you for doing that. The students very much appreciated it. Can you elaborate on that particular bill? What is it about? What was it that made it your priority to support this change in this bill?
Yeah, so companies that we interact directly with, Walgreens, Walmart, Target, Facebook, Google, that's first-party data, which is we're, for the most part, consenting for them to take our data, and we know who they are. But it turns out there's this massive ecosystem of these entities called data brokers that we don't have a direct relationship with. We've never heard of them, and they scrape information about us. They may have SDKs and mobile apps via third-party cookies. They buy public information, government records, et cetera, and they take all this information and they build profiles on us. And it's gotten to the point where they completely can track our location, and in a post-Roe world, it's pretty scary that you can actually buy data of who's visiting abortion clinics, who has period tracker apps on their phones. I mean, you can just literally buy this stuff as well. And just on Monday, Duke University, some folks associated with that university published a report showing how you can buy data about military personnel and their health conditions, and they even bought it from foreign countries, and they just went ahead and sold it. So the fundamental problem is that we don't know who these people are. And now California and Vermont, I worked on a state bill in Texas. They now have a registry as well, and Oregon just added one as well. Well, the data brokers do have to register, although most of the data brokers don't register for various reasons. There's, I think, about 4,000, only 500 have registered in California. But at least, okay, now you can see who the data brokers are, but as Roger talked about, it's incredibly painful that you go to the first one, it may take 30 minutes, you have to jump through a bunch of hoops, and that's going through Aardvark. There's no way you're going to get to Zebra, right, through the list of 500. And say it takes 30, 45 minutes each to go through it, multiply it by 500, that's 10 days worth of work. Say you are a victim of domestic violence, and you want to not have your address be trackable where you currently are. I mean, telling that person to spend 10 days to do that. And then the data brokers, once you do the deletion request, they can continue to collect new information about you or buy that information from other data brokers and repopulate. So it's a rinse and repeat. And so I felt that, and it's not an original idea, we have the FDC Do Not Call registry where you can go and say, take me off the telemarketer list. And there have been proposals like Senator Ossoff and Kennedy has the Delete Act. This was in the ADPPA, Section 206. So other people have proposed this, but I thought this would be perfect for California, where you could have a website operated by the California Privacy Protection Agency, where you simply just go and as a California and say, delete all my information. And then the data brokers periodically have to check that database, and from then on, they actually have to purge your information, say they check every 30 days, or in the case of the law, it's 45 days, and any new information they get on you, they also have to delete. And once you make that request, they can no longer sell or share. So it's one-stop shopping, and it really fits in with my vision of trying to make privacy easy. For Alistair's Prop 24, 9.3 million people voted for it. 9.4, sorry, who's counting? I mean, that's more than voted for Hillary Clinton and Obama in California. It's, in terms of raw number of people voting, 9.4 is more than 10 states in the United States. People want privacy. 96% of people turn on app tracking transparency in iOS. But privacy is so hard to actually take advantage of this. And so to me, this was a big, easy button. So I got to give a lot of credit to Senator Becker, who took my idea, ran with it. He was the one that drove it, but I worked with Alistair's organization, supported it, Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. And there was fierce opposition, but Governor Newsom, to his credit, signed it. And it's the first in the nation. So yeah, that was a big one. And hopefully, it can spread to the rest of the United States, but no doubt the tech industry will try to find a way to, sue it or water it down, et cetera. So we have to be vigilant with that.
Can I share the nightmare scenario? So there is a bill coming out of Congress that's going through Congress about a FISA, you know about FISA courts, which are the ones that do national security stuff. So there's a rule, section 702, that deals with how the permissions you need in order to do investigation that touches Americans. And Congress has decided that it wants to renew 702, but require that you have a warrant in order to get any information about Americans. The reason is because the Fourth Amendment prevents you from government from doing any kind of investigation of you without a warrant. The problem is data brokers allow them to bypass that. It is the entire business of Palantir. It is the entire business of literally hundreds and hundreds of data brokers. It is the key to Google's business. It is the key to Meta's business. It's the way that they've been protected by the government since 9/11, that the quid pro quo was, we get access to all of your data and we'll clear the way for you. And the White House is defending law enforcement on this and saying that it's a red line we will not cross. They have to be able to have warrantless investigations of Americans. Think about that. Okay? That's what we're up against here. Okay? The data broker thing, Meta's a data broker, Google's a data broker, they're all data brokers. Everybody's swapping data. And, it's not healthy, it's not American.
So, Roger, on this same vein of legislation, there is a chapter in your book about what the government can do. And California, I think, has done quite a lot since you wrote the book, but there is obviously more to do. What are your policy priorities? What would you like to see happen, both at the federal level and perhaps at the state level, next year, the year after, from a legislative?
Well, let's not put a time frame on it. Let's just try to be, what do we need? If we want to save democracy, if we want to save human autonomy so we're all making our own choices, I think you need three things. You need to recognize that consumer safety actually matters and that it is a cultural problem. There's no law that requires Silicon Valley to consider the safety of those affected by its products. So they don't, because it's friction. They're trying to eliminate friction, and safety is very high friction. It turns out that's true throughout the economy. There's almost no rules for consumer safety any longer, right? There are a few left in the airline industry, there are a few left in the car industry, but generally speaking, we're on our own. So I would like to have a thing that applies to all of tech, that requires that tech companies demonstrate that their products are safe as a condition of market access. If you put that law in place today, no large tech company would be allowed to move forward with their product. They'd all have to be withdrawn to make them safe, because every one of them trips over some basic description of what safety is. Second thing is human autonomy. This is where privacy comes in. I think I would like to recognize, as Shoshana Zuboff says, that surveillance capitalism, this notion of using data to manipulate the choices and behavior of people, is really no different than child labor. It takes away human autonomy involuntarily. And therefore it should be banned. Which, in a perfect world, you'd sit there and say, I'm sorry, there are no third-party uses of data. I can give you data for a service, but then you have to throw it away. That'd be perfect. Politically, I think that's a bridge too far. Politically, I think what we do is sit there and say there are certain classes of data: location, health, app usage, web browsing, maybe financial, where there can't be any third party. You know, I can give you the data, you can use it to provide a service, you can't use it for other services. Right? I think that would be super helpful. And I think those two things are absolutely necessary to preserve democracy.
By the way, the second one of those is that's what CPRA does with the, if you choose, they can't use your sensitive personal information for any purpose other than the one you expect.
Except that it has changed the behavior of absolutely no one. So there's a difference between the law and the practice. No, I'm with you, pal. I mean, look, you know I support you 1,000,000%. I'm just making the point that it's not enough to pass the law. You have to have the infrastructure to enforce it, okay? The budget for the thing that they're involved in is $10 million a year. If there's ever a case in California, Google alone will spend $100 million fighting it, okay? So, I mean, we have to make the response equal. Oh, great.
And I have to say, it's probably the best funded privacy, well, it's the only privacy
privacy
agency in the nation, so we're also the best funded
It's
one.
13 million more than anybody else has. I concede it. But it's not enough, right? That's the point. And then the third one is we need to create space for alternative visions of technology to come to market. So we need antitrust law to essentially eliminate the ability of people to dominate adjacent markets through use of data. And we need to break up the incredibly inefficient, incredibly harmful monopolies that exist today. Those three things, that would be what I would recommend.
Thank you so much. We're going to talk a little bit now about...
Oh, by the way, it's worth saying, there has never been a bill on safety relative to tech, and there has never been a floor on the vote of either House of Congress relative to antitrust, okay? We have had bills that have gotten surfaced but never voted on related to privacy. But Congress has done literally nothing, and no president since this started has done anything.
We might have to talk to Rick and figure out if we can make a proposal in California for one of those things, maybe. Talking a little bit beyond legislation and talking about policy, and going back to that picture that we have in the book of the octopus, right? So this, I'm incidentally reading a book that has to do with octopus at the same time that I was reading this, but you know, octopuses are just an amazing creature that is very adaptive to their environment. And I think that the argument could be made, and Roger made this point on the financial crisis and how things change in the Silicon Valley, that these organizations exist, you know, these monopolies exist because they just have evolved to survive their environment, which is the tech environment here in the Silicon Valley and in other places. So thinking beyond what Sacramento can do or what Washington can do, what are the other dynamics that could change to generate basically a different type of industry? Maybe not octopus, but you know, pick the animal that you might be more comfortable with. That's the theme of these questions that I'm going to ask right now. The first one is for Tom and Roger. You both are tech insiders. You have successfully navigated the Silicon Valley innovation roller coaster. What will you suggest could happen more locally here in the Silicon Valley that can make a change? And it could be different approaches to maybe obtaining funding, what gets funded and why, or collaboration between organizations. Maybe there has to be more research funding in some maybe educational institutions, and to connect with the safety proposal that Roger was talking about. What are the other ingredients beyond legislation that can generate a better environment, a more consumer protective environment?
Okay. Well, I think, okay, so outside of legislation, I mean, what you really need is a more competitive environment. And by having a more competitive environment, that means companies will be more willing to add features that improve cybersecurity, improve privacy, et cetera. The fundamental issue is that a lot of the tech players are large walled gardens, and we're kind of stuck in those gardens. So if you were to leave Facebook, you can no longer communicate back with the people that are still in the garden. So it really takes everyone en masse to leave. And so they don't have the competitive pressure to do more in the areas of privacy, cybersecurity, et cetera. So besides legislation, which is not the question, is what can we do? And I think the first is that if you try to build alternatives to these walled gardens, I think interoperability. So I think that entities, communities really need to think about interoperability standards. People are trying to do with alternatives to Twitter right now that Mastodon can talk to Blue Sky, et cetera. And so having that interoperability, that if one of them takes off, then it kind of floats the boat. So moving away from closed systems, I think would help competition and then would drive people to do more privacy, et cetera. I think the other thing that can be done, which is again not legislation, is that the reality, I'm very scared that the tech companies that dominate social media, search, et cetera, as we move to an AI world, is that they're going to dominate that as well, because they have the computing power, they also have all the data, which is the two things that you really need with respect to AI. And so I'm hoping that there can be a greater emphasis on shared IP, open patents in terms of royalty-free use of patents. And so maybe the government can have universities that when they do come patents that it's available to everyone, as opposed to trying to monetize to counter probably the big patent arsenal that the large tech companies have. Or if the government sues a large tech company, that is part of the settlement, that they force the actual tech companies to make their patents open. And I think Roger mentioned this in the 50s with the Bell Labs decision, that it forced Bell Labs to basically make it open intellectual property, and that facilitated a revolution in transistors, solar cells, things of that nature as well. So I think the key thing is to get more privacy, cybersecurity stuff that's more positive. You need to figure out the competitive angle, and obviously there's antitrust, but there's things that the overall community can do, as well as from in legal stuff that can kind of force the opening up of some of these technologies from an interoperability and an IP perspective.
I would suggest, not as an alternative, but just a second way of looking at the problem. So I don't believe that making competitors to these things will work. I think that each of these products was fundamentally lightning caught in a bottle. I don't think there will be a replacement for Twitter. I don't think there will be a replacement for Facebook or Instagram. I think when they're done, we're going to move on and something new will fill the space. I think 5% interest rates is the most important change. It takes the stupidest ideas like crypto, like metaverse, and makes them uneconomic. And I think without Microsoft's extraordinary save, I think that would have happened to generative AI. But I think they realized 5% interest rates would kill corporate stock buybacks. Therefore, corporations were going to be desperate for something, and Microsoft could offer them the thing. And because OpenAI was in such financial difficulty, Microsoft got the deal where they get all the ups, right? I mean, it's a crazy deal that nobody would have done unless they were on the verge of bankruptcy. And so my hypothesis is 5% interest rates force a recalibration of everything in Silicon Valley. And from that, potentially something good happens. But I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to make the next Twitter or the next Facebook. I'd spend it asking a different question, which is 5% interest rates forces us back into making stuff, right? The financialization of everything is over for a while. So we're gonna have to make stuff. And like somebody asked me, what's the best idea I have today? Real simple, Southwest Airlines plane management system. It rains anywhere in America, the whole system comes down. It costs them roughly $1 billion a week, right? Every time it comes down. They should be willing to pay a startup $1 billion or $2 billion just to fix that problem, one customer, right? And every company that's putting new manufacturing in, nobody's built new plants in America in 40 years. We have no idea how to make these things productive. They're building a new tunnel under the Hudson River. It costs 6 times what it costs to do the same thing in Europe. There's a business opportunity to figure those things out. America's going to become a country of builders again. That's what 5% interest rates do. And Silicon Valley hasn't thought about that in at least 15 years. And that's a huge opportunity.
Thank you so much. Alcire, I know that you're also a very successful entrepreneur, but your background is not in tech. So I have the same question for you, but from a different angle. What do you think other sectors, other industry sectors could teach the tech sector in terms of, becoming more consumer friendly, more stable?
Well, it's funny. I've been reflecting on what Roger said about no safety laws anywhere. I'm not sure I agree with it in other areas. I totally agree with it in tech. Like, I think it is actually remarkable when you think about the fact that there's really no sense of monitoring the impact of some of the stuff they do. But when I think about my industry, I couldn't be in a more regulated industry, right? Like, how wide is the doorway? Can a wheelchair turn around the bathroom? And when the guys come around, they actually measure it. If you ever do a project that's insured by HUD, I mean, it's those, when you do an inspection for them, they a little bit of paint on the sprinkler head, you're out. So I don't know if you think about lead paint or you think about cigarettes. So I think a lot of consumer laws in this country, safe cars, are still there. And I guess my message for the tech industry, kind of along with what Roger's saying, is, there should be some of these laws, and don't fight it so much, because it's not like there's no more car companies just because we decided to, put anti-lock brakes or have crumple zones, or it's not like there's no more paint companies just because we don't put lead in the paint anymore. Now, they all fought that tooth and nail when it was happening. We got to be able to have cigarette vending machines in high schools, because how are we going to?
The end of child labor.
Yeah. But I think if you were more farsighted as one of these companies, you might say, sure, I'll rather than abandon my position, let me try and meet in the middle. But axiomatically, unfortunately, I think all business does this. You just fight regulation. You fight regulation because you're like, nothing good can come of it. But the reality is, as citizens of the country, oftentimes, I'm not a fan of regulation for the sake of regulation, but oftentimes regulation makes the situation better. I'm super happy that the FAA is looking at the pilots, making sure they don't get drunk before they get on flights. That's a good thing,
Something we can all agree to.
Maybe the pilots don't agree, I have to say. So let's talk a little bit about enabling innovation, and I think that we already touched upon this, but there's a lot of, I think, criticism that comes to regulation from the point of view of, are we disabling innovation? Are we going to be able to compete if we have these laws? My favorite way of answering that question when it comes my way from proponents of no regulation, I always say, well, if regulation was the thing that stops innovation, the Silicon Valley will not be in California, because there's plenty of other states that have much less regulation. But I really want to get...
Silicon Valley is in California because the regulation of AT&T
That's a good point.
forced the transistor in the public domain, and a small group of people outside of Stanford were the only ones in a position to do anything about it. So, I mean, this is the great thing, but you look at antitrust law. In Silicon Valley, antitrust law has always led to the creation of the biggest industries in the history of Silicon Valley. Every single one of them is the result of an antitrust action. And every single time the target of the Antitrust Act went to an all-time high and stayed there after the antitrust action.
So interesting.
Regulation is, without it, Silicon Valley wouldn't exist, the tech industry wouldn't exist, and the reason Silicon Valley is dying culturally is because you're letting people with very narrow educations make all the decisions.
So my first question was going to be for you, Roger. So you just advanced part of the answer to it. Thank you, and actually gave me a better answer next time I'm asked that same question. As a tech venture capitalist, I know that you think about balancing the protection of consumers with innovation, but can you talk to us about where you draw the line? Where do you draw the line of what regulation is sufficient regulation or too much regulation? And also the other conversation that I have heard a lot now. I'm going to teach AI and the law, and you know, we're going to talk about AI in a second, but there's this question that comes up every time that regulation on AI is mentioned, which is, and what about China? Can we compete with China if we regulate AI in the US? Because there is a race, and if we regulate, we're going to slow down our industry.
So, 2 thought experiments for everybody in the room. Do you think America, just to run this as a thought experiment, America that didn't have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, would we be better off or worse off? Okay, and my point is just think about that, okay? Then just extrapolate it. The consumer-facing internet, if it were entirely gone, and the only thing you got to keep was Wikipedia, would you be better off or worse off, okay? So when you're thinking about innovation, the key thing to remember is the people who are the incumbents have articulated a vision that supports their goals. But the notion that that is innovation, I find laughable. I think the industry in Silicon Valley stopped innovating in 2009 when it went into this extractive model. It made a ton of money for itself and its investors, but it hasn't done anything innovative since then. To me, innovation is how do you solve the Southwest Airlines problem? When you're competing with China, the last time we competed successfully with China, how did we do it? Jet engines, Disney, and Colonel Sanders, KFC, right? We do it by competing with our own values. The Chinese aren't doing generative AI because it's bullshit, right? They're smarter than that. And the point is, anything where size of data is the defining thing, they're going to win because they got absolute government control and a much larger population. It's insane to try to compete with them that way. And only Eric Schmidt could say that with a straight face. Eric's really smart. He's one of the best salespeople I've ever known. But he's not right about that. If we want to compete with China, we got to push the values that we believe in, which historically have been in the Enlightenment values of democracy and the right of self-determination. If we no longer believe in those things, great. But if we no longer believe in them, competing with China is really going to be a problem. Because they have too many other advantages.
Thank you so much for that answer. Now, similar question for you, Alastair. I know that when you engage in any policy that pushes privacy forward, one of the labels that get pushed to you is that you're anti-tech or you are anti-innovation. And part of the journey of getting us to have CCPA that was amazing to me as looking at it from the outside is that these 2 forces, innovation, no regulation, and everything has to be regulated, have been represented for many, many years by different organizations in the US. And it was like this, like pushing against each other. And you came from nowhere, and you actually found a way to drive a change through that gridlock. So if you can talk to us about that experience of how to break a gridlock and get to something that's different, and also how to strike the balance, creating something that, again, is not anti-innovation, but just drive some reasonable requirements forward?
Well, first of all, I'd say I don't think of myself as anti-tech. I think like the internet is clearly, I think, the best invention in humanity's history, most powerful. That said, I feel like, I think I've said this before, Brad Smith wrote a book, who's the president of Microsoft, wrote a book called Tools and Weapons, and so many things can be tools and weapons, and you just need a little bit of regulation to make sure that the things that are supposed to be tools don't end up being used as weapons. So I think that that's kind of where we are with privacy. And I feel like, and I'm not picking on you, Roger, about it not having changed. I think this is a cultural change that is if the Sherman Antitrust Act hadn't been passed, who knows what the country would look like. And 30 years later, we're still talking about where is the edge for antitrust. But at least it was the thin edge of the wedge that got there. And I think what we've done here.
And it took 48 years before there was a prosecution under the Sherman Act that was outside of Standard Oil, right? I mean, it took 48 years. It's a long process.
But at some level, maybe regulation should lag innovation, because you don't want regulation to kill innovation, right? So here we are, and I think now, 1 in 4, because a lot actually of states have now passed, some good, some bad, but mostly a lot like Colorado, Connecticut are kind of modeled on California's law. And I think for the good states, we're going in a direction where, give it a decade, for 30 years before, there was no indication at all that America was not going to go in a radically different path from Europe, where personal information was just going to be treated differently, and we were going to say, we're America, and it's too bad you have no rights. And we've kind of morphed back onto the world where actually no, personal data does now in America have some protections in some states, and I think that's just going to get stronger with time personally, because I think people want it. I mean, I really think people desire it and want it. And yeah, it'll be inefficient and it'll be imperfect, but I think this is one of those times where we shut the barn door before the horse had finally left. And I think I'm optimistic about what that will happen over time, but I'm very worried in the short term. Yeah, we're worried about the next election cycle. I'm worried about a lot of these things, but I'm optimistic that we have corrected the ship away from the iceberg, and I think we're heading in generally the right direction.
Thank you, Tom. Your book obviously talks about big tech and monopolies, and you have brought it up into this conversation already. The antitrust activity that's happening both with the FTC and the DOJ, I know it's something that's in your mind. What are your thoughts on the big term tech firms and competition, and how that impacts innovation?
Lack of competition exasperates the problems with privacy and cybersecurity because they're not being pushed to do more. And one of the big areas is that a lot of these large tech companies, they provide a marketplace, but they also participate in the market. And so take, for example, say Spotify. You want to now offer audiobooks on your app. But you have to pay, you being Spotify, have to pay either Google or Apple 30% for that transaction to occur. But Apple and Google don't have to pay that 30% tax. That's fundamentally unfair. Similarly, if you take a look at transaction fees, like if a merchant would only have to pay 1 or 2%, like if you go to a coffee shop and use your credit card, they charge 30%. That's fundamentally unfair, but what are your alternatives to selling an app or doing a transaction with a mobile app? And I think that really hurts companies trying to do stuff in mobile here in Silicon Valley. Similarly, Amazon, they have this incredible marketplace, but they're gleaning all the information of what's being sold, right? And you've done all this incredible research and figuring out what the right product is, say a dog bed, that you figured out this really crazy cool dog bed, and you start selling a lot. And meanwhile, some product manager at Amazon saying, my God, look at that spike in sale of dog beds. Let's come out with a basics version of that, because they have the marketplace, but they also can participate in the market as well. And I fundamentally think that that's unfair. And so I think, not even getting into antitrust and suing these big people, there could be laws passed that ban self-preferencing that also go after the transaction fees and mobile fees as well. Because again, just going back to kind of one of the theses that I have in the book, is that because of lack of competition, there isn't more progress in the areas such as privacy and cybersecurity, and I'm very worried that lack of competition will exacerbate problems that we face with AI. All right, well, thank you very much, and thanks, Pete.